Welcome back to Place Brand Leaders, the podcast of the Place Brand Observer. In the last episode, we looked at the reasons why many place branding projects fail. And this time I want to share with you some ideas on the keys to place branding success, how to make sure that place branding programs pass the test of time. Basically, I will share with you a summary of insights from our panel of experts, which has also been published in my recent book, An Insider's Guide to Place Branding, Shaping the Identity and Reputation of Cities, Regions, Countries. The book was published by Springer International in May, and you will find a link to it on the website placebrandobserver.com. So, what are the keys to place branding success? How can we avoid the common root causes for failed place branding programs and make sure they won't become unsurmountable obstacles later on? Our specialists, members of the panel, think that there are basically 5 main ways to succeed. And the first is educate and communicate, and this is very important. The second is leadership. The third key to success is ensure adequate funding. And last but not least, define, measure, and monitor success. So starting with the first point, educate and communicate. Since lack of understanding about what place branding is or isn't is a principal root cause for failure, as we saw in the last episode of the podcast, it's hardly surprising that leading thinkers and practitioners underline the importance of educating and communicating, considering it a key factor for success. This perhaps does not refer so much to knowing the theory behind branding or being able to conceptually define a place brand, rather making sure that key stakeholders, and that's politicians, industry professionals, businesses, and residents, understand the meaning of a place brand. So, for instance, that it is not about selling their city, region, or country, but about ensuring and supporting sustainable community development. If those key stakeholders understand that place branding functions from the inside, they are more likely to give credibility and long-term support to the program. The same applies to the brand proposition. So we need to ensure that all constituents in a community understand the brand promise and how their efforts support its delivery. Moving on to the second key to place branding success, leadership. So involve the right partners and stakeholders. This is tied to political instability and lack of clear, continued leadership, which we identified as a root cause for failure in the last episode of the podcast. You really need to make sure to involve the right partners and stakeholders, which will get you so much closer to succeeding with place branding. For instance, reflecting on her own experience in Tel Aviv, Israel, Hila Oren suggested that collaboration between the municipal body and the private sector and civil society is imperative to ensure a city brand is successful. At the very least, responsibility for the branding success process and the brand itself needs to be assumed by the industry partners and the political leaders who oversee implementation of the strategy. It should be spearheaded by a team of dedicated change leaders who can support it as brand advocates and brand guardians. So, in other words, those who drive the program and feel responsible for its success. Günter Soidenbay, in his contribution to the panel session on the topic, stressed that strong leaders must be internally motivated. So he suggests that this person could be the mayor, the governor, or the head of the development agency. Regardless, that person must envision, protect, and nurture the brand, he said. Protecting the brand can mean a lot of things, so including guarding against fraud attacks that can diminish the brand's value. But all this needs strong leaders and the right partners and stakeholders. The next key to place branding success is adequate funding. In the book, a chapter on keys to place branding success, you will find details on the different funding methods. The most common are public sector funded, private sector funded, public-private sector partnerships, or civic sector driven. The next key to place branding success is ensuring brand authenticity through involving the local community. So again, this is very closely linked to the reason for failure which we identified in the last episode of the podcast. Yeah, so apart from education and clear communication about what place branding is and how it helps communities and locations with their identity and reputation, B, leadership, and C, adequate funding. This is another key success factor. Many of our panel participants underlined the importance of making sure that visual and verbal brand identity match the reality of the place and its community. And furthermore, once established, the message and the narratives must be constantly hacked to assure they correspond to the changes that take place over time. A good example is the New Zealand story. So the 100% pure tourism advertising slogan, and which became pretty much a nation brand proposition. And over time, they updated it. They made it about 100% pure you, so a little bit less focus on pristine environments and more on personal experiences. Later on, they matched it more with the Maori community. And this is important to just keep it, to update it regularly. Oliver Söllner is a professor at Stuttgart Media University in southwestern Germany. He said storylines, narratives, values, moods, etc. So in other words, the realities of the place tend to change and shift constantly. So as place branders, we don't want to communicate brand stories that are fancy, make-believe. We must seek to grasp the spirit of the place and its essence. And this is also something that Cecilia Pasquinelli agrees on, and she calls for a focus on the ordinary life to be celebrated as a place brand. And that's because people, how they live and interact with one another are a key part of a place experience and how it is perceived. Ordinary doesn't mean dull, however, as imagination is perhaps the most important success factor of all. And Robert Gowers, who is an expert on imagination and how imagination can help communities position themselves and grow, he mentioned that if you agree that place brands are built and reinforced through concerted, focused action, so not words, you need a constant stream of imaginative, communicative, innovative, creative ideas, projects, investments, infrastructures, policies and events that are uniquely and unmistakably from a city or country. And this is a point also raised by Martin Boyson, who emphasized the need to harness the creativity of the place in a continuous process of inviting stakeholders and citizens with good ideas. So this is a very important key to place branding success. Another one, which is also increasingly important, is that we have to measure and monitor success. We cannot improve what we cannot measure, which in turn requires clear objectives and mandates. So we need to agree on key performance indicators from the start to evaluate both individual projects and the way in which generic efforts and budgets have been spent. I personally find this one of the most critical aspects, and one which is not yet well understood, how we can measure and monitor success. So this is something we will look at in the next episode of the podcast. Until then, I hope you found this shortcast useful, and hope that you tune in next time again. Thank you.